podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Social Media Derby. Today we've got a really special episode with a really good guest and mate of ours from Sports Pro, but also he's done a bunch of events with us at the Frank Sue Foundation. It's Josh Sim. How you doing, mate?
All good, thanks. Thanks for having me. And John C, thank you so much. I've been watching and listening along to the podcast, so a real thrill to be on in person.
Yeah, thanks, mate. It's been... We've chat about obviously all the guests that we get on, and you were definitely someone we had on the list, and we definitely wanted to try and get you on with all your German football Bundesliga knowledge. Hopefully, when one of our teams will play in a German team. Sadly, we've got Bayern, and we've been absolutely battered by everyone else in the group, so it's not really a super exciting fixture to chat about. But we'll get your input on kind of how Bayern are doing as a team. It's a bit of a weird time because they've been generally from afar, it looks like they've been doing pretty well, but they've just got an absolute battering on the weekend. So, I'll get your input on whether you think that's a good or bad thing for Man United. And we'll look at the results over the weekend. 2 losses, Arsenal and Man U both taking losses. I think the Arsenal loss was a bit more kind of expected, or could have been predicted, I guess, with Villa's form, but the Man U one, absolute shocker. But before we get into that, how you doing, John? You good?
Yeah, mate, I'm not too bad. The Villa result wasn't what I wanted to see, but we'll get into that later. But other than that, I'm doing well, mate.
Yeah, I'm sure the Man U loss earlier in the day made you feel slightly better about the situation. But yeah, there's 2 games to go through as well. I don't know how much you had a chance to check it out, Josh, before we get into like kind of the preview stuff and start talking a little bit about Bayern and United's fixture tomorrow. But we had United-Chelsea 2-1. Bit of a weird game, actually, because I think, anyway, from my perspective as a United fan, we kind of battered them. I don't know if it was United playing really well or Chelsea playing really badly. I mean, from the looks of the Bournemouth game, it's probably the latter. But we won that game 2-1. And then Luton, Arsenal. That was a strange match, wasn't it, John? It's like 4-3 Arsenal. I remember I watched the latter half of that game, and I was just so confused by how it went. But did you get a chance to check out, Josh? Firstly, the midweek games. What did you think of the United Chelsea game and the Luton Arsenal game?
Yeah, I didn't get the chance to watch it live. I sort of caught the YouTube highlights of both, so that's full disclosure. First of all, but I thought starting with the Luton Arsenal game, I thought that was a pretty just interesting result. I think. Obviously Arsenal's firepower was there to see, and they did very Arsenal things. It's not really a very descriptive way of describing it, but they were very much their attacking identity was very much in place. The defending was interesting. I mean, 2 of the goals from sort of set piece or aerial situations, so it's kind of individual errors in that sense. You can't really say it's a system failure. And then obviously vintage Ross Barkley decided to show up on a Tuesday night. So yeah, it was an interesting game for Arsenal. I don't know. I mean, take those sort of 2 aerial situations aside, maybe it points to John C will probably know if there's a more deeper weakness with aerial situations than I would. But it was a pretty close game, and obviously Declan Rice repaying the big transfer fee. And then just quickly on United Chelsea. 2 teams, I guess, who have suffered pretty much this season, and thought that in some ways I have sympathy for Pochettino because he's had a lot of injuries, and the back 4 or back 5 seem to be quite sort of switching week in, week out, and it just seemed as though they weren't quite at it. Just there was some hesitation in decision making, or just and obviously United took advantage of it. So I don't know. That's sort of my cliff notes on the 2 games, but I'm sure you guys have much more stronger thoughts on how those games went.
Yeah, John. So, what did you think of the Luton game first of all? Because you went big, didn't you? I think you were predicting a big thrashing of Luton because we kind of don't really
Mm-hmm.
rate them as a team, but
Yep.
it was really tight in the end. What did you make of it?
Yeah, it was a lot tighter than I expected, and I mean, I was on the edge of my seat the whole match because, yeah, the set pieces we were just getting packed out. Got like corner after corner, everyone was just crowding around Raya. He got absolutely nowhere near it for the first of the two kind of set piece goals, and then the second one was just, complete failure of marking essentially. So it was a weird game, but I mean, in the end, it ended up probably being better for morale than a 2-0 win might have been, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
when it comes to the outcome, I think the outcome for fans and for the team was probably better than just beating them 2-0 because we had that last minute winner and all of that stuff went on. And it was also good to shut up all the rival fans because obviously everyone was live tweeting as the match was going on saying, oh, look at Arsenal bottling it again. And just to get that last minute Rice winner shuts everyone up for a little bit. So it wasn't good from a performance standpoint. Like David Raya was unbelievably shaky in that game. And with all of the drama going on around our goalkeepers, that is not what I need to happen. I need him to just put in some real solid 7 out of 10s over and over again. But yeah, no, it was poor from him. The only good thing about it was that we were obviously from an attacking standpoint, we were a lot more clinical than we had been for like the last, let's say, 13 game weeks before that. So good and bad. Everyone's going to say, oh, you beat Luton, don't get too happy. So from that perspective, I can't, go too crazy on it. But I think for morale, it was probably a lift for the fans and for the players at the time. And I think Raya after the game was going up and like patting Rice and like giving him a hug. He's probably owes him a couple now based off of the saviour that Rice had to do for David Raya's silly mistakes.
Yeah, no, we were chatting about it on like group chat. Just the amount of shaky moments goalies are having in the Premier League, especially like the ones at the bigger teams. If you think about pretty much Allison aside, every big team's goalie's been having a few shockers and a few clangers here and there. Anana probably being the biggest culprit for that. But even Edison, I think during that Spurs City game, there were a couple of shots, and I love Son. He's a great player, but the goal he scored, I think respectfully, Edison should probably save. There were a couple of other shots that went in that game that I thought Edison could probably do a bit better. And I know his whole shtick is that he's great with the ball at his feet, but you shouldn't be a hologram in goal. You need to be able to make simple saves as well. And I think Raya didn't cover himself in glory in that game, and I think if he didn't make some of those errors, both in the air and also you could say with the Ross Barkley goal, which pretty much went straight through him, then I think you would have probably won that game quite comfortably because attacking wise, you looked decent in that Luton game. There was a bit more fluidity. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't vintage Arsenal from last season, but I thought you guys were getting there. So yeah, it was just unnecessarily tight, and I think you could point towards the goalkeeping and defensive errors, like Josh said as well. Set pieces, like Arsenal are generally pretty strong at set pieces. They don't normally concede too many from corners or free kicks and stuff. So it was quite uncharacteristic, I think, for you guys. But like you said, I get it. It's a last minute goal, limbs in the away end. It's not a bad thing. You know what I mean? It's better to win that game than draw it or lose it.
The worry to me is, though, if you watch the Aston Villa game, you'll notice that that every single corner they got, they crowded round Raya.
Yeah.
So not only are those mistakes bad from just an objective standpoint, but he's actually now telling other teams to pack him out, and he was flapping at it again in that game. So if this is the way that people have found to beat us, we might have to bring Ramsdale back in, man.
Yeah, Ramsdale from crosses. I mean, I know it's
he was
unfair
better.
to judge
He's
him.
taller.
No, he was, but in the games that he's played this season, I don't know if it's because he's, not had much game time, but he's also looked a bit shaky in that area, more than normal. So I don't know. What do you think, Josh? Do you think what do you think about this Raya Ramsdale experiment that Arteta's done?
I just think it's really interesting, just as a like a psychological mental experiment, just because I'm not a goalkeeper, but I've tried to listen to as many goalkeepers sort of weigh in on the discussion, and it seems like an extended run of games sort of breeds confidence. And so it's pretty interesting to sort of see how it's gone. It seemed as though when Arteta signed Raya, it seemed to be like we'll swap them in for situational stuff, and now it seems that Raya's just sort of got the first team jersey under lock and key at the moment. So yeah, I still feel as though I'm still interested to sort of see how this goes. It still feels like an experiment, very much its infancy. But it is interesting that teams have sort of latched onto that being Raya's weakness and are now trying to capitalize it for sure.
Yeah, no, I definitely don't think it's not a trend you want to start seeing happen. Especially when Arsenal have been pretty good with set pieces, and I don't know if Villa really exploited it. I don't think the 1-0 result had anything to do with that, but yeah, it's not something you want to start seeing happen, right? You don't want to see specific tactics employed to take advantage of a perceived weakness against your team, especially in quick succession. So yeah, it's not. It wasn't something that you would like to see happen against your team, and especially with the next result being a defeat. You know, in Arsenal's next game at home to Brighton, De Zerbi's going to try and copy and do something along those lines to try and take advantage of it. So it's interesting to say the least. With the United stuff, I completely agree with you, Josh. I feel bad for Pochettino. I actually really like him. I don't think he deserves the situation that he's in at Chelsea. And I think if you were to scale it, I think Chelsea, 60 to 65% of that was a poor performance on Chelsea's side. 35 to 40% was a good performance on the United side. We were so wasteful, but it's not like we did, and we created lots of chances, but it's not like we played sensational football. I think it was still pretty much direct as hell. Try and play through the thirds very quickly through the centre, and try and exploit the gaps that Chelsea left. But I don't think we played vintage football in that game either. But I think obviously because United and Chelsea are the top 6 teams are kind of like the banter clubs. I think there was more emotion around the win because of that reason rather than the performance itself. And then the game against Bournemouth, I think everything bore fruit. Like the way we played, we were poor. We were really, really, really poor in that game. Thankfully, I didn't watch it live, and I saw highlights and watched the game back afterwards. And honestly, Bournemouth should have beaten us 5-6-0. And to say that at home, I think is absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, I watched that game start to finish, and you guys were terrible.
Yeah, man, 100%. I can't even fight back at all. I'm just like an absolute corpse when it comes to trying to fight Man United's arguments because, try and pick up some steam. Bournemouth was the one easy fixture we had in this run of fixtures that will kind of end after Villa in a couple of weeks' time. And that's the one we got absolutely thrashed in so far. We've obviously got Bayern and Liverpool coming in the week, but I thought 3-0 probably flattered us. While 2-1 against Chelsea probably flattered Chelsea, I think 3-0 flattered us, and I think Gary Neville agreed, didn't he? I think I saw him tweet something about 3-0 is a decent result because we got absolutely pumped in that game, and Bournemouth, man. I think we mentioned in the last pod that they're doing a little bit better over the last couple of weeks, but I did not see them coming and absolutely battering us like that. But we are what we are. We're just an absolute inconsistent team. And I think, for me anyway, I think this next week is going to be really... I wouldn't sack Ten Hag, and I would still back him, but it'll be interesting to see what the club do and what the board do with Ineos coming in, whether or not they pull the trigger if we get battered by Bayern Munich and get battered by Liverpool. But absolute sad times. And I went out for lunch with some mates on yesterday on Sunday, and all I was doing was copping it. From even the Arsenal fans who'd lost 1-0, on the same day were still giving it to me. Liverpool fans, Chelsea fans even thought they could say something while they were getting battered by Everton. So, yeah, to lose 3-0 at home to Bournemouth, absolutely mudded and very worrying times. But yeah, let's move on to the preview section of the pod. We'll look at the Champions League fixtures tomorrow and on Wednesday. Oh, actually, I think we're both playing them tomorrow, so we can just talk about the games in particular tomorrow, and then also the Premier League fixtures over the weekend. So, Josh, since you're a German football Bundesliga expert, done stuff for Get German Football News, as well as 90 Min and other publications around German football. What's your take on Bayern Munich? Because we talked about it a bit earlier in the pod. They got absolutely thrashed 5-1 by Frankfurt on the weekend. Now tell me, do you think that's a good thing for us, or do you think they're going to be like a wounded animal? And even though they've qualified from the group top already, do you think they'll come in with a point to prove?
I often sort of compare Bayern Munich to the Incredible Hulk in the sense that once you rage or you anger them, they come back more venomous and more hungry to sort of eat the next opponent alive. I was in Germany when they got knocked out in the cup by a lower league team, and they then played Dortmund the next game at Dortmund, and sort of you could sense there was people sort of thinking maybe Dortmund have a chance to sort of beat Bayern, and then Bayern then went to Dortmund and won 4-0. So on track record, I think this will definitely fire up Bayern. They also drew 0-0 at home to Copenhagen in the last Champions League game, and so they I guess they're smarting off 2 below par performances. And yeah, I expect them to sort of see this as a sort of a statement opportunity. Particularly, they rested. They had Musiala come off the bench. They had a team. They played Eric Choupo-Moting at behind the striker, which is not exactly sort of their first choice attacking lineup. So I fully expect them to sort of see the game against United as a opportunity to sort of again make a statement and sort of stamp their authority again, because like I said, they're smarting off 2 below par performances, and then you have United, and they also have a home game against Stuttgart on Sunday, and that's Stuttgart in 3rd place. They've had a really good season, so it's a big week for them as well in terms of reclaiming the narrative, I guess, that they're going to be the ones to beat.
Yeah, no, I think that's probably the only saving grace for us. And I think if they weren't playing Stuttgart at the weekend after this midweek fixture, then they could field a full strength team and try and really really bounce back. There's a little part of me hoping and praying that they'll write off this United game, or they won't take it as seriously. And I understand losing 5-1 to Frankfurt is not a fantastic result, especially when you've got what looks like it's going to be a really tight title race with Leverkusen ahead of them. But like, I did watch that Copenhagen game, by the way, and I was absolutely livid. I was like, I had Bayern Munich to beat them at home, beat Copenhagen at home as a banker, and now, instead of just hoping for a Copenhagen win, which I think would have helped us in the final fixture, now we have to hope for a draw, and then obviously hope that Bayern kind of rest players or they don't put in the best performance and we beat them. So my prediction for the United Bayern Munich game is probably going to be a draw. I don't think we're good enough, even if Bayern don't take it seriously, to actually beat them. But I wouldn't be shocked if United games at the moment, I don't think they're predictable at all. I think probably the only match that's going to be predictable is the weekend fixture at Anfield. I think we all know what's coming at Anfield on Sunday, but pretty much every other game is a bit of a coin toss. So I think we'll probably draw, and I'll go for something. I'll go for a Desmond. I think it'll probably be 2-2. What do you think, Johns, around the Bayern United game?
I think they're going to beat you 3-0. The reason I say that is because their last two fixtures have both not been good, right? Like they lost to Frankfurt 5-1 and they drew with Copenhagen before that. So I don't think you can bet on Bayern Munich losing or drawing or underperforming 3 matches in a row. So even if they've got Stuttgart on the weekend, I think they'll make a point out of making you guys look silly and batter you, so that they go into the Stuttgart game with a bit more confidence. Even if they don't need to from a group perspective, I don't think they want to leave this group with 2 bad results in a row against you and against Copenhagen. So I think they're going to make an example out of you and slap you 3-0, if I'm honest.
So you're saying we're going to, for the second time this season, we're going to go off back-to-back 3-0 defeats at Old Trafford. You know what?
Yes.
I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if that happened, because it makes sense. And I do remember that game that Josh talked about, the Dortmund Bayern game, and I think at the time Bayern had a couple of shaky performances. And they just absolutely battered Dortmund. So I wouldn't be surprised if they go into this game off the back of that Frankfurt defeat and absolutely pummel us. And, the way we're defending, I don't even think it would take a fantastic performance to do that. If Bournemouth can do it, there's no reason why, a second string or slightly weaker Bayern couldn't do it as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think if you do get battered, that could be the end of Ten Hag. Yeah.
I was going to quickly add that if there is an
really,
area...
You're calling the end of...
Sorry.
Go for it, Josh. Sorry, mate.
Oh, no. I was going to say, if there was an area that United can exploit, it's down Bayern's right side going forward, which would obviously be on United's left wing, which would obviously require Marcus Rashford to sort of recapture the form that he's seems to have lost quite suddenly, just because Upamecano, there's a mistake in him. Unfortunately, that he just doesn't seem to be his concentration's there, but then there are there's a lapse where you can sort of maybe find a United player running through and goal, and he's culpable. They've also sort of their right back spot's not entirely settled because they've played Konrad Laimer at times there, who's a midfielder. They've played Mazraoui there, but then they've also shifted him to the left. I imagine they'll probably play with him on the right and Alphonso Davies on the left, but yeah, that would be the area. But obviously it would require, as I said, Marcus Rashford sort of going from 0 to 100 in the space of 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, I can't see that happening. As much as I want it to happen, there's no way I can see Rashford. I think Rashford's probably not even a certain, starter at the moment. He's obviously not started the last couple of games. When he's come on, he hasn't really inspired any kind of change in the performance. So, yeah, I think if we had last season's Rashford or, purple patch Rashford from previous seasons, then I completely agree with you. I think Upamecano with Kim Min-jae is one of the funniest defense combinations going around, because Kim Min-jae is very solid. I really rate him. I think he's probably one of the best defenders in the world. And he definitely helps Upamecano up his level. But I think he's just like, when Ramsdale admitted on that podcast or whatever, or the clip went round on the podcast where he said he couldn't, concentrate and he had problems, focusing. I think Upamecano is the centre-back version of that. Like, it just looks like he has lapses in concentration constantly. And so I think there was a game, United Leipzig in the Champions League a few years back, where Rashford absolutely roasted him and got a hat-trick. I think it was when there were no fans in the stadium and we battered Leipzig, I think 5-0 or 6-0, something like that. And I just remember that game thinking, Rashford didn't even have to do that much, really, to absolutely roast Upamecano. He just made silly positional mistakes. And boom, Rashford was in one-on-one with the goalie, or Rashford just like dinked it past him, and he was so high up the pitch and committed himself so much that it was kind of an easy finish for Rashford in the end. So I agree with you. If you had in form Rashford, I reckon we'd have some joy down that side. But I don't. We obviously don't have in form Rashford. Maybe Garnacho could do something, but yeah, I think that's a lot to expect from a teenager, even if he has been doing really well recently. Johns, what do you think about the PSV Arsenal game then? Because that's a bit of a dead rubber, isn't it? Like, what do you expect of that game?
I mean, based off of PSV's performance last week, I could see them, trying harder. I think for us, I think we're going to put out the bloody under-21s if we have to be honest with you. I don't think we're going to be going super hard at it. And I think from looking at the group, if I look at the group now, I mean, PSV would have to lose by quite some margin, and Lens would have to win by quite some margin for PSV not to get through. So I don't know how hard PSV are going to try, to be honest with you. I think they'll want to get through, so they'll probably put out a decently strength team, and it will really depend on how bad of a team Arsenal put out for that match. So I could see it. Let me go for a 1-1. I think PSV will do just enough to get through. Arsenal will put out the kids, and it will be it won't be one for the record books. I'll tell you that much.
That's what I was going to actually ask you. Do you reckon they will put out the kids? Because I've heard some Arsenal content creators say they kind of want to see a blend of both, because there's a couple of players that haven't really got loads of game time recently. Ramsdale's obviously an obvious shout in goal. Some players in defence like Kivior and stuff like that who could probably use a bit more game time. Would you go full B team, or would you kind of at least drop in a few of the first teamers?
I mean, from reading the news, it looks like we're taking Ethan Nwaneri with us. We're taking Lino Souza and Walters. So I imagine none of them will start. So I imagine we'll probably put out some of the weaker players like Kiwi will get a chance, Jorginho will get a chance, Reece Nelson, some folks like that might get a chance. But I think depending on how the first half goes, we'll probably start bringing in some of the youth team to play for the second half. So I agree, though. I don't want to see complete youngsters out there. Like I would like to see some of the players that are a bit shakier. I'd like to see Zinchenko even out there. I'd like to see some of our players, like our first team players that haven't been performing as well, because I think a lot of them are real confidence players and they just need a bit more time on the pitch. So yeah, I'd put a lot of our kind of B team out there first, and then maybe bring on some of the youngsters or bring on some of the A team, depending on how the result is going.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because I really don't think you want to take another. You don't want to. PSV are one of those teams where I think you guys lost there with your kind of almost full strength team in the Europa League last year. So they're obviously a good enough team that if you go too weak, you could catch a slapping. So you don't really want that for the morale and everything like that. Because, the weekend game against Brighton, we talked about United having a tough week. Brighton are pretty much Arsenal and Man United's bogey team over the last couple of years. They got a win at the Emirates last season. They've already beaten us at Old Trafford, although, some would argue that's not too difficult this season. But, they have good performances against some of the big teams. So you don't really want to come off the back of a Villa defeat, lose in Eindhoven, even with some, rotated team, and then go into that Brighton game, with the club kind of off the back of 2 defeats. So I hear you, man. I would definitely try and sprinkle some first teamers in there just to make sure you don't lose that game and keep it respectable. I think if you come away with the draw, that's not too shabby. And then you can round out the group. You've already won it, so it's just a morale kind of confidence thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, like PSV are like what 10 points ahead in the Eredivisie already, so they're definitely no slouch. They're absolutely slapping teams. They've got like a perfect record so far, like 15 games and 15 wins. So they're no slouch. And I think if we do go too soft, I think I could see us losing, because they beat Sevilla, even if they were down for a good portion of the game. They managed to come back and win. And Sevilla are obviously no slouch either. So, I don't want us to lose to PSV. Let's put it that way. So whatever we've got to do to keep it competitive, even if it ends up a draw, I'm fine with that. But yeah, we can't go to PSV and lose.
Yeah, I don't think that would be great. Josh, what do you think? Because we didn't get your predictions on those 2 fixtures. Do you think there's any chance for United against Bayern? And how do you think Arsenal will fare against PSV?
I'll say quickly United, Bayern. I think United will get a goal, but I think it'll be 2-1 Bayern maybe, or 3-1 Bayern. I don't like, as much as I think they'll want a response. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if it'll happen that way. Come tomorrow. But as for PSV Arsenal, I think it. Yeah, I think you guys have sort of mentioned it. It depends on sort of what kind of team Arsenal put out. I know it's they were playing a mid-table team in their last game, which by the way was on Thursday, so they've had quite enough rest between that game and now. But they put 30 shots against Heerenveen in a 2-0 win, and I'm struggling to find a recent game rather, where they've gone fewer than 10 or 11 shots. So and obviously their manager being Peter Bosch, he used to coach in Germany, and his teams were, and he coached Lyon as well. His teams are very much attacking, and that's the only way he knows. So I am going to put it down as a 2-2 draw. Obviously contingent on Arsenal putting out a mixed, some starters, some bench players, kind of 11. Just on the back of that, I don't think. I don't think PSV will hold back, and I imagine Arsenal there'll be players like a Fabio Vieira or a Kivior, sort of players like that who will probably want to put in a good performance to sort of put themselves forward as the December run-in continues.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think you're right. I think a lot of it's dependent on what teams are fielded in both games. If Bayern don't field their full strength 11, then we've got a semi chance, and if Arsenal don't field a full strength 11, or at least a blend of some of their first teamers, you could lose that game. I don't think you'll get slapped, but I think you could lose, and I think Josh's stats around the shots are pretty ominous, because you don't really want tons of shots being rained in on Ramsdale when he hasn't had loads of game time recently. Could end quite badly. But let's go to the Premier League weekend's fixtures. Like I alluded to, pretty difficult games really for both teams. Arsenal obviously at home to Brighton, United going to Liverpool. I've got to start this off by saying I'm absolutely shitting it for this set of fixtures. I mean, Arsenal-Brighton, I think even though you've got a bit of a bad record against them, I think there's a very good chance you could beat them at home. Whereas with the Liverpool-United fixture, I'm going to need some encouragement from you guys, because otherwise I can't see anything. I can't see Liverpool not scoring at least 4 goals. Let's put it this way, and I can't see us scoring more than 1. So I think we're in for an absolute thrashing. I'm hoping and praying it won't be 7-0 again, because I don't think I could take 2 7-0s back to back at Anfield. But I'm not positive. No Bruno as well, and I have to mention this right now. Bruno getting a yellow card in the 90-plus minute against Bournemouth might have been the most petulant and stupid thing he's ever done. And so him, it looks like he's bottled it. I've got to be honest. We can't prove it. We can't say, for fact that he's done it on purpose. But it really, really does look like he's just gone, you know what, I can't hack it. So I'm going to hold my suspension and miss this game. But yeah, what do you guys think? Johns, first of all, what do you think of Liverpool United? Do you think I'm right to predict an absolute battering, or what do you think? Do you think we've got a chance?
I don't think you have a chance. No, unfortunately. I think you're going to hold. I think you'll hold goals. I think it could be you could hold 4, could hold 5, but I think you'll score. So, unlike the last game where it was, you didn't score any, I think this time you could actually score. But I don't think this. I don't think this is a game where you can really turn it around, if that makes sense, right? Like as you said before, this is probably one of the hardest fixtures that a team has to play in the Premier League, and I would argue it's harder than playing City at home. So, or let's say City away. So I think from that perspective, if I were you guys, I would want to just kind of like do the FIFA route and just kind of give up on the match and give them like a 3-0 win. Just say all of our players are injured. Sorry, we're not going to come and play you. We'll just take the 3-0 loss and move on, because I mean, they're ranked number 2 in goals scored per match this season so far. They're ranked number 3, in away from home wins this season. I know obviously this is at home, but Their form recently has been nuts as well. They've been not slapping, but they've been winning all of the games they need to win. And I feel like this is the one where they come out and kind of put an exclamation point on it, where they just absolutely slap you to pieces. So I'm in two minds, but I'm gonna go 5-2. I think they'll beat you 5-2.
Oh God. The days when a 5-2 doesn't even shock me anymore. You know what I mean? That's how desensitized I am to United being absolutely pants. That someone could say 5-2 against our fiercest rivals, and I can't even argue. I don't even have a leg to stand on. Because I'll be honest, I think it could be 5-0. Like, I can't see how we're gonna. I know we've been scoring a few goals lately, but in the big games, away to Arsenal we scored one, right? And I think Ramsdale should have saved that. Away to Tottenham, we didn't score any. At home to City, we held 3 and didn't score any. I mean, Chelsea, do you count them as a top team anymore? I don't know. I guess if you do, then we scored 2 against them, and that's semi-decent. We played Newcastle twice, scored none. Lost 1-0 when it probably should have been about 5-0, and lost 3-0 at home to their, like, you know, D team and about 10 fullbacks.
Liverpool let 3 into Fulham, though.
So, yeah, I know, but Fulham have got more about them than us.
True.
And that really hurts me to say. But, you know, I didn't predict Fulham scoring loads of goals this season, but they also just beat someone 5-0 on the weekend. Like, you know, they apparently can score goals. Whereas I can't remember the last time we scored 5. You know, it's been ages. It's probably under Ollie was the last time we scored 5, and it's about like 3 or 4 years ago. So, yeah, I don't think we're going to score many goals. If we do, we'll score 1. I think there's some crazy stat, like Liverpool have scored like 50 goals and we've scored about 3 in the last 7 or 8 meetings at Anfield. So it's not like we've you know, been at least creating lots of chances and scoring goals there in defeat. We've been routinely pumped every time we go to Anfield. So yeah, not looking forward to it. Josh, you're my last chance, mate. Are you going to be able to give me anything positive or any kind of hope in this fixture, or do you think we're also going to get slapped?
Well, obviously, this is the repeat of the Liverpool 7, Man United 0 we saw in the fixture last year. And United had been on a 4-game winning streak, I think, heading into that. So it's interesting now that, you know, that was a result, that 7-0 result, obviously, you know, I don't think many people had predicted. And here we are several months later, and it's what we sort of expect from this game. I think it comes down to, you know, we know who Liverpool are. We know what their identity is. We know what they're going to do. They're not the mystery here. It's whether, you know, United try and shore up at the back, or do they try and have a go at Liverpool. And I don't think they're good enough to sort of keep it tight at the back. And I just can envision problems for them should they try and have a go at Liverpool, given the space that'll be left at the back for Salah or Nunez. So yeah, and even bringing up that game, that 7-0 game, I look at the 2 lineups that United had that game and the lineup against Bournemouth, and I mean, save for some absences due to injuries, it's not really a different team. So yeah, I'd be very concerned if I were you, Anthony. And yeah, I do think there'll be a goal for United, given that Liverpool have lost Matip. Their defensive stocks are sort of low, with Robertson obviously out as well. So there may be some fatigue because obviously they have the Thursday night game. But yeah, it's hard. I'm going to be generous, I guess, and say 4-1 Liverpool. But that feels like a minimum basement result, and the ceiling is obviously limitless, it feels like.
Oh my god! You know what, Josh? I used to really like you, mate, but you just absolutely killed me on my own podcast. For sake, limitless possibilities. It sounds like a bloody broadband, motto or something. But that's Man United right now. Limitless.
Let's bring up one good thing, and this might be construed as a bad thing or a good thing, depending on how you look at it. No Bruno means opportunity for a different captain to step in, and it might be the one, the only Slabhead.
That's not a different captain, though, is it? He
No,
used to be our captain, and he was rubbish. So
no, I know, but he wouldn't get on the field as much. And I'm going to go back to my default stance on United so far, which is you need people that try hard. If I were you, just stick the whole like under 21s out there. You don't need to play any of your current players. They all have proven they don't really care all that much. Just stick your youngsters out there because they will, at least for them, there's some pride still on the line. You know, they haven't lost all of it yet. Maybe for them, they'll come out and actually try hard. And if you do lose, at least you'll lose with a good bunch of players trying their absolute best. Because so far, this season for Man United, the only players that I can say have, you know, not covered themselves in crap would be some of your younger players. I would bring them out there, get Harry Maguire in the back, and see what happens.
What do you think, Josh? Do you agree with that? Would you just feel our under 23s or under 18s, or do you think you'll actually give our first team a shot?
I was going to raise a slightly different point, but I guess because he is only 20, it kind of applies. I do think Rasmus Højlund has that sort of skill set that can bother Van Dijk or I assume Kanate or whoever ends up being Van Dijk's partner, or maybe a Joe Gomez. Given that he is sort of that bustling, all running, all limbs sort of forward, I do feel like he is one of those strikers that can possibly trouble Liverpool's centre-back pairing. And I do feel, but again, it depends on whether United players look up and find him, because I have that visual of Dalot going for goal against Bournemouth, and Højlund sort of there on the edge of the 6-yard box looking at him furious. So there may be, and I imagine Liverpool will give opportunities like that kind of chance out to United. So it's a case of decision making. But I do think Højlund is the type of forward that will potentially give the likes of Van Dijk a bit of a headache, given that he's just a dynamo and will just continue running at him.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think actually he's one of the few players that I really feel sorry for over the course of this season and how inconsistent we've been. Because since he's come into the team, I think there's only been a few games where it looks like he's not been at it, or to be honest, he was probably a bit injured, and we brought him back into the team a few times early, and so his performance wasn't fantastic. But the majority of his outings in the United shirt, he's looked a threat. And to be honest, we've underutilized him massively. Like, I don't think our wingers are set up to provide opportunities for a striker. When I look at Garnacho, as good as he's been in glimpses, if I look at Anthony, as bad as he generally is normally, although he's been semi-decent in the last couple of weeks, he's also not a winger who looks to provide for a striker. Rashford is obviously, quite goal-hungry himself and been completely out of form. So there are not many players in our team, maybe Bruno aside, who you could say is actually looking to find him in certain scenarios. Like the Dalot situation you bring up, Josh, is a great point. Like, I have a lot of time for Dalot. I don't think he's a bad player. I think he's improved in a lot of areas. But my God, when I saw that highlight and then I watched back the game, I was livid. Like, how could you? And the thing that's most annoying about it is he actually looks over his shoulder a couple of times when he's running onto that ball. So he knows where Højlund is. He just decides to shoot from a totally acute, completely almost impossible angle and thinks he's got a better chance than if he had squared it for Rasmus. And to be honest, it just shows the football IQ of a lot of our players and kind of the greedy nature that I think a lot of them kind of have. I don't think there's a lot of teamwork and kind of, teamwork that goes into a lot of our play. And even if Ten Hag tries to kind of instill it in them, I think we've got a lot of players that want the limelight for themselves. I think even Scott McTominay, like, don't get me wrong, he obviously scored the goals against Chelsea. He's one of the few players who scored goals for us. But I do think there have been moments in the last couple of weeks. I think Galatasaray is a great example where he should have passed the ball and he sees a shot on goal and he takes it. Now, I understand he's obviously scored a bunch of goals and people are, giving him kind of that, late run into the box type midfielder tag because he's had quite a few, goals in the last couple of months for United and Scotland. But, you should be passing the ball, and that's things that you see good teams do. Arsenal do that, Liverpool do that, City definitely do that. They often pass the ball until the best person has an opportunity to shoot, and then they do, and more times than not they score. And we don't have players that are set up to do that. So yeah, it's tough times when on both of the predictions, Josh's summary is I think you guys can score, and that's like the positive. But there's no semblance of a positive result coming from either of those games in terms of the predictions. So yeah, I can't disagree with you guys though. Yeah, I've got a horrible, horrible feeling we're going to get pumped again, and I'm just praying it's not going to be to the same heights that it was last season. But let's go on to the Arsenal game then. Arsenal Brighton. What do you think, Johns? Do you feel like you guys are going to be able to get this hoodoo off your back? Because like I said earlier, Brighton have a great record at Emirates and Old Trafford. Do you think you're going to turn it around?
I think we'll win. So, I mean, Brighton have been, and it feels harsh to say this, but they've been a little bit underwhelming so far this season. I mean, their form hasn't been great. They've been letting in a lot more goals than they were last season. You know, some of the players that they've been relying on haven't been quite as good. Obviously, they've kind of replaced some of them with other players now. So, for example, Matoma hasn't been lighting the world on fire, but like Adingra has been going crazy. João Pedro has been really good as well so far. He kind of is a little bit shaky though. Sometimes he has his off days and he has, you know, games where he scores 2 goals or bangs a hat trick in. So it's difficult to tell. But I think with Arsenal, I think we'll be able to exploit some of the kind of defensive issues that Brighton have been having so far this season. And I think depending on how the game goes against PSV and the squad that we field for that match, I do think that we will come back and kind of bounce back positively against Brighton. I know that they've got a decent head-to-head record against us, and they seem to have kind of a way of beating a lot of the good teams in the league. But I can see this being a little bit more comfortable than I would expect against Brighton, given how good they were last season. So I'm going to go for 3-1. I'm going to go for an Arsenal 3-1 win. Have that De Zerbi.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm quite as positive as you on this, but I mean, I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that you beat Brighton. Like Josh made a good point about Liverpool playing in the Europa League on Thursday. Brighton are obviously going to be playing in the Europa League as well. I think, like one of you guys mentioned earlier, Brighton are playing Marseille. Oh no, they're not playing Marseille, but they, you know, both them and Marseille are really tight as to who's going to finish top of the group. And obviously in the Europa, being, you know, United and one of the Europa aficionados of the last 5 years, considering how many times we played in it, I know that top of the group you go directly into the last 16, right? And if you finish second, you play the teams that finish third in the Champions League in like a knockout phase to get into the last 16. And I'm sure Brighton will want to look to avoid that and get straight into the round of 16. So they've got a lot on line during the week. So your point probably, if you rest enough of your team against PSV, get a decent result, and Brighton go for it on Thursday, then I think you've probably got a good point. They'll probably come into the game quite tired, and you've got a good shot of beating them.
In their last 5 fixtures, they've lost to Chelsea, and they drew with Burnley. So, I mean, at this point, if you're drawing with Burnley, and again, not to put too much shame on them, because I'm going to look like an idiot next week when they beat us 4-0, but I feel like we've got enough to just score more goals than they'll score against us. And I think that's what this game comes down to, which is not really about defence, but it's going to be about who's going to score more than the other. And I think we've got the tools to do that. I don't think Brighton are the kind of team that are going to come up and sit back against us like a lot of the successful teams this season have been doing, right? They're not. I don't know if they're going to be compact enough at the back. I don't know if in the centre of midfield they've got enough about them defensively to kind of do what a lot of the teams that have been successful against us do. So from that point of view, I think they're going to come out and play. And I think we talked about this last week, which is the teams that come out and play against us, we score goals against. And I don't think it's in De Zerbi's ethos necessarily to just kind of sit back and kind of Jose Mourinho it, right, and park the bus and kind of build from there. And I think you saw against Aston Villa, not to say that they parked the bus, but we definitely deserved a lot more from that game than a 1-0 loss, right? And it was mainly based off the fact that they were playing very physical football. They were playing very structured behind the ball type of football. And I'm not trying to belittle them to say that they were like, you know, parking the bus against us, but we know what works against Arsenal if you want to get a result. I don't know if De Zerbi is willing to do that. And as you say, depending on how he's coming off that midweek fixture, is he going to have the tools at his disposal and the amount of energy required to do that, right? It's a lot of chasing after the ball. It's a lot of discipline required. Is he going to have enough energy-wise in his squad to do that after a midweek game? And does he, from like a ethos perspective, actually want to play like that? Those are the two major questions I have.
Yeah, but Brighton are a bit. I hear what you're saying. I 100% agree, and I do think the higher likelihood is you guys beat them because they play that way and they leave spaces for your attackers, and they're in a bit more form and a bit more fluidity, and you take advantage of it. But what I will say, if there's one team that can go and travel to a big team and play them off the park and win, it is Brighton, right? Like the Villa don't do that. Newcastle don't really do that. They go a bit more practical, like you said, pragmatic, and they look to try and minimize the opponent's strengths. Brighton don't. Like we've seen them go to City, go to United, go to Liverpool, go to Arsenal, go to big teams and play. And sometimes, a decent amount of times, they get a good result from it. So yeah, De Zerbi's a mad scientist. I wouldn't put it past him to come up with the tactic, which is still really attacking and get the better of you guys. But I do think in the timing of this game, I think probably gives you guys, the advantage. What do you think, Josh? Do you think Arsenal are going to be able to get the win, or do you think Brighton and De Zerbi are going to continue their hoodoo over Arsenal?
Well, Anthony, you were spot on. Brighton have to play Marseille in this final game, so it is winner takes all in terms of the progression to the playoff round versus obviously progression beyond the playoff round to the next round. So it does come down to how much importance do they put into that final game against Marseille. I'm sure they'll want to sort of be 3-0 up, 4-0 up with 60 minutes played and being able to sort of sub off their key players. But that's the ideal scenario on paper. But obviously, the sport doesn't run that way on paper. And I think, while yes, Brighton's attacking threat undeniable, they will put a lot of pressure on a David Raya or Ramsdale. I imagine Raya. I also think they will give chances away, and it depending on who they play at fullback. I mean, against Burnley, they played James Milner at left back, and I'd be licking my lips if I was a Bukayo Saka or a Gabriel Martinelli or whoever gets to start against him. Should James Milner start at left back again? So yeah, it's going to be an entertaining game for sure. And I also feel like Arsenal's backline can set up well against Brighton's attack. Just then that João Pedro and Adingra, obviously they play out wide, but obviously they come inside as well. And obviously Zinchenko, he seems to be the starting left back for Arsenal. He sort of obviously occupies that sort of inside position. And similarly, obviously Ben White's very adaptable, can go out wide and defend obviously the central area as well. So yeah, I think Arsenal will win. I'm going to say 3-2. It was between the 3-2 and 2-1. I've just gone with the more goals factor, just because that's what I want as a neutral in this game. But I think Arsenal. But I do think Arsenal have enough to sort of stop Brighton. But again, it, as I said, it sort of comes down to how much importance Brighton put on the Arsenal game, given that they've got to play Marseille, and obviously that's two lot of teams you have to prepare for in 7 days, and see different tactical plans and all sorts of things that De Zerbi's just going to have to ensure that team sort of gets through the week, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We're reaching this part of the season where there's just so many games. Like the teams have got to just concentrate on rest and recovery, and then do as much tactical prep that they can do before each game. But realistically, if you've got like 3 days between games or 2 days between games, the majority of your focus is on trying to make sure the players rest and recover and actually have energy to be able to play in the next game. And you're going to see loads of rotation. So that's why I think these games, starting pretty much from this next weekend, are going to be really hard to predict, because I do think you're going to see a bunch of results that you're not gonna see coming. Like I think the Fulham game this past weekend was one like that. The Sheffield United game, I did not think they would beat Brentford, and they managed to get a win. So I think things are going to get interesting over the next couple of weeks. But I like your prediction, Josh. I think 3-2's a good one. I'm going to go 2-2. But I wouldn't be shocked if Arsenal win 3-1 or 3-2 or even slap Brighton 4-0 or something like that if they're tired from midweek. But I just think De Zerbi's one of those new age managers that I think he's the one. He's one of the few kind of new age managers that are going to be as part of this new crop of big managers going forward. And I think he'll find a way to get something from that game. And I really like Johnson knows. I really love João Pedro. Even when he was at Watford, I really rated him and think he's a really good player. And he seems to have a bit of a clutch gene. He's always taking like last minute penalties or big penalties away. I think away at Marseille, he tucked a penalty or two away with a really raucous crowd screaming at his face, and he managed to do it without any kind of problems. So I really rate him. And if Evan Ferguson plays in that game as well, I think he's got the stature. You, Josh, were talking about Højlund up against Van Dijk. I think Evan Ferguson's a player that could give Arsenal's centre-back pairing some trouble. Maybe not enough to win, but I think he could definitely give them a good game. So I think it'll be really interesting. But yeah, I'm going to go 2-2. But that's probably more hope than anything.
Also remember that they got slapped by Aston Villa 6-1 earlier in the season. So they're no stranger to letting in a lot of goals. And although Villa just did us over, I do think that we'll have enough. I like what you said about João Pedro. Obviously, he is a great player. And those kind of players that are quite jinky can do us over on the right wing. Unfortunately, or on the right side of our defense, because I think one thing that's understated recently is while Zinchenko has been shocking defensively, Ben White hasn't covered himself in glory recently
I
either.
agree.
And it worries me a little bit of that left side. I'm kind of glad that Ansu Fati's not playing, because that left hand side, I'm a little bit worried what might come from that. I'm not as worried about Evan Ferguson, and again, clip me up. I'm sure he'll go and score against us now that I've said this, but I'm not as worried about that because I think when you think about Saliba, yes, he might not have any issues or I think he'll be enough to keep us together when it comes to the kind of down the middle, whoever's playing down the middle. I'm just more worried about the wingers. And I think Adingra, it's been understated how good he is. He's been really, really good on the right-hand side. He could give Zinchenko problems or Kiwior problems, whoever it is. I completely forgot that Tomiyasu's out until bloody January, so he's not going to play. So that worries me even more on the left-hand side. So I think if they're going to get goals, they're going to come down the wings. But I just have just about enough faith that we'll be able to outscore whatever they can throw at us. So, yeah, I agree with what you're both saying, though. I think there will be quite a few goals in this game. But it's time for Arteta to show his mettle, mate, and show De Zerbi what's good.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree with you, man. And I'm probably one of the biggest Zinchenko haters or kind of critics that there are out there. I think he can't defend for toffee, but I do think Ben White has kind of gone under the radar a little bit. He was so good last season in a role that a lot of people thought he was not necessarily going to play that well in. And this season he's just looked off it, and he's looked a bit complacent defensively. And it's quite strange because he's
looked knackered as well.
I don't know why. Like, why is he so tired? Like, he's had periods out of the team where Tomiyasu's come in and done really, really well. So I don't understand why he would be that tired. But you're right. I don't know if it's physically tired or mentally tired or what, but he just doesn't look as sharp as last season. And yeah, he's not been at his best. And I do think you're right, Josh. The players that Brighton have on the wings, and Johnson as well, they're really tricky, and I think that's probably the most likely place that Brighton will get joy if they do get a good result against Arsenal, because I think Gabriel and Saliba are pretty much locked down. There's not many strikers that get too much joy out of them. So it's going to be interesting, really interesting week of football coming up. And yeah, really good to get your guys' input on it. Let's move on to the interview section then, Josh. Obviously, being a special guest, we've got to try and plug you as much as possible and get more information about kind of your journey and your story. Me and Johnson have talked a lot about it. There's just not that many East or Southeast Asian people in football or kind of like wider sports media. You've obviously got Jonathan Liu, who's doing amazing stuff, but kind of past him, I don't know of too many myself. In traditional media, let's say, obviously there's a couple of people in fan media, obviously John Shin, who we've had on the podcast a couple of weeks back. But yeah, there's not that many, not many out there. So obviously when I saw some of the work that you were doing, and then obviously we worked together on an event for the Frank Su Foundation last year. It was really, really good, man, to see some representation out there and see you doing really, really well. And yeah, like I said earlier in the pod, me and Johns really wanted to get you on, kind of ever since we started doing the pod. Just try and find a good time to get you on when we had some German teams to chat about. But yeah, it'd be really good to just chat with you and understand your story. Like, first of all, like, what your background is and kind of like, who you are and how you got into the industry.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a small hesitation there, but yeah, I guess in terms of who am I? I moved around a lot as a kid. I didn't come to the UK till when I was about 13. But I was already at that point an established football fan. I'd sort of was inspired by the 2006 World Cup, and yeah, I guess sort of me venturing into this sort of space began at uni, as I feel like career paths do for several people. I was leading the sports department at a student radio station, and then this was during COVID, so then we then had to transition into being a bit of a YouTube channel. And yeah, I felt it was pretty important to sort of get content out, and obviously people were home, and it was kind of easier to sort of do interviews with people obviously not being able to go out and do what they usually do. And at that point, I just sort of decided to then start doing a writing. It wasn't, none of this, I guess, was a well orchestrated plan. It feels like a sort of a magician's trick when they sort of pull out a ribbon and then the next ribbon comes out and the next ribbon comes out. And it's sort of been like that, really. So yeah, by the time I sort of was getting to the end of uni, I thought I wanted to give it a shot. And yeah, did a master's degree in sports journalism for a year, and then luckily found my feet and got a job at Sports Pro as a reporter now, pretty soon after graduating. So yeah, it's all happened quite quickly, and it's all been it's been a great experience so far. And obviously, you just want to sort of get on the ladder, before you sort of reach the peaks of chief writer or senior reporter or whatever. So yeah, no, just enjoying the ride and just trying to just learn and progress and develop further.
So you mentioned the World Cup 2006. I'm guessing that was what part of that tournament kind of really inspired you to get into football and potentially into like football sports media, because like we've spoken to a few other people on the pod, and obviously there's age differences and there's people are inspired by lots of different things, but what in particular from that World Cup really got your juices flowing?
Well, first of all, full disclosure, I don't want to make either of you feel bad, but I was 7 at the time. So I was really young. I think, and it's the power of the wall poster, I think. Those posters where you can fill out the results on your wall. I believe someone in my family went to a sort of hi-fi TV store and got a TV, and then the poster came free, and then handed the poster over to me, and I then sort of took it upon myself to sort of try and catch as many games, obviously write down the results and fill out the poster as neatly as possible. And then just sort of getting sucked in. It was that 2006 World Cup. I felt like there was a lot of stars at the tournament when you think about it. So a lot of big names and a lot of dramatic games as well. As someone who's Australian, the getting knocked out by Italy in the round of 16 on a last minute penalty still burns in my memory to date. But even so, you had the Rooney red card and the Ronaldo wink. You had obviously the great Brazilian team of Ronaldo, Ronaldinho getting knocked out in the quarters, and obviously who can forget that Zidane and Materazzi incident that led to the headbutt. So I felt like there was a lot of sort of incidents and flashpoints and storylines that came out of it, and then from there, I guess it sort of just carried on to the Premier League, and around the same time, someone had sort of convinced me at school to support Liverpool, and I trusted them. I trusted their judgment.
Oh, no.
I had no reason to doubt their judgment. And so I think it was off the 2005 Champions League win as well. So seemed like a good time to jump on. And that was it from there. And then I sort of started trying to catch as many games as you can. Obviously, living in Southeast Asia at the time, the time zones were a little less. It was harder to sort of stay up for, I guess, the big night games. But it was from there. And obviously I then had started playing at school and outside school as well. So having that to hand as well probably helped as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I remember, and Johnson will probably be able to validate this, but in my mind, the big World Cup that had that kind of impact on me as a kid was probably the 2002 World Cup, because I was in secondary school, or I think I was in just at the end of primary school, and obviously that was hosted in Japan and Korea, and England played obviously that iconic quarterfinal game against Brazil where Ronaldinho, packed out your keeper Johns with that cross come shot, and that had a similar impact on me. But now that you kind of went through all of those key moments, I can completely understand why someone would be like super inspired by the 2006 World Cup, because there were just so many iconic things that happened at that World Cup. You had obviously it was a bit of a changing of the guard kind of World Cup if you think about it. There were a lot of kind of that vintage era of class 90s players kind of coming to the end of their career, and kind of the new guard, the new age crop of players that will kind of lead us into the 2010s kind of coming to the fore. So I get it. It makes a lot of sense. Damn, I didn't know you were a Liverpool fan, so that hurts, but makes sense why you are saying
that's
the
where
possibilities.
That's where the limitless comment comes from, doesn't it?
Yeah, all of these things are adding up now. So I feel like I've been fooled into letting an enemy on across enemy lines. But yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And when it comes to your role at Sports Pro, because I want to dig into that a little bit, what's it been like? Because I know you don't just cover football. I know you cover all kinds of stuff, and obviously from the business angle. And we're talking a little bit off air about the Premier League rights and everything like that. But is there any kind of like specific project or article or piece of work that you've done recently that you think has kind of acted as another kind of inspirational piece for you in this space?
Well, just quickly on the Liverpool thing, I mean, I don't advertise it as much nowadays because I've sort of become less attached to the Premier League, and obviously, as you said, and as you know, I'm sort of more focused on German football these days. But it is still there. There's still pang, that heart flutter, if you like, whenever they're on the TV. But no, to go on to your question at Sports Pro, yes, no, you're correct. For those who don't look at our stuff, we cover the wider sports industries and not just football, but obviously we have a lot of people from the US who read our stuff, so we cover sort of basketball and American football. Obviously those are gigantic industries in itself. Obviously football, soccer, wherever you're in the world, and stuff like golf and all those other sports. So yeah, it's been good to sort of, I mean, it is sort of an intense experience, I guess, diving into all these different sports. I mean, some of them I had already started to follow, but obviously some were completely new. but it's been really good. And in terms of sort of pieces that have stood out, one, I mean, I liked just because of just passion and interests was we mentioned the Dortmund Bayern game earlier. I was lucky enough to be in Dortmund during last month because I was there invited by the Bundesliga along with other journalists to sort of do some pieces about them and the Bundesliga. And it was a crossover with the NFL actually, so a few pieces on that with them, with their sort of relationship as well. But yeah, it was a really insightful piece. Obviously, I was already interested in German football, so it wasn't really a hard sell that trip. And being able to dig into it a bit more and obviously write about it for a different audience than I'm used to writing German football about was quite fun. And yeah, I think I got to speak to Michelle West in October, and that was a real pleasure, given that, as you guys know, she's probably one of the most iconic Asian American athletes of recent memory as well. But obviously, paving the way in golf, and you see a lot of Asians or Asian golfers sort of have broken out since. And obviously, she did it at a really young age as well. So it was really nice to sort of ask her about golf, and obviously she's now retired, but she's doing a lot of she's got a very busy investment career, so that was nice. And obviously, as you guys obviously know, October was Asian Heritage Month in the UK as well, so I did mention that to her just because I thought the timing was quite fortuitous. So yeah, that was a whole podcast, Sports Pro podcast. People can listen to it there, and there's also a write up of the interview as well on a website. So those two are pieces that I'm really that I guess appealed to me for different reasons, but ones I'm pretty passionate about and really glad I got to write and be a part of.
Yeah, no, the German football one sounds unbelievable. I think if there's one like stadium, and I don't know if John will back this up, but like going to Dortmund to watch a game is high up there on the like European football stadium kind of experiences on the wish list, because yeah, unbelievable. It's a shame they sing "You Never Walk Alone" and all that kind of. There's a bit of a Liverpool influence there, but you know, I will still love to go there nonetheless and experience it. So yeah, that sounds like a sick experience, and that is something. The other part around identities, I guess, a really important one. It's obviously something that we mentioned earlier. You know, there's not that many, at least in football anyway. Obviously, you've got Son, you've got Kim Min Jae, you've got a batch of players in this era, but still, if you compare it to other ethnic groups, you know, I still think we're pretty underrepresented when it comes to big major sport. So yeah, getting to speak to fellow Asian trailblazers in different sports, especially golf and stuff like that, where, you know, I know in recent times there've been more top Asian golf players, but you know, if you go 20, 30, 40 years back, you probably wouldn't see too many non-white golf players in the professional game. So that sounds like a sick pieces, man. Definitely go and check them out on Sports Pro. Check out the podcast. Check out Josh's articles on the Bundesliga. They're going to be really good things to support. Obviously, there's not that many Asians, like I said, in sports journalism, so you've got to try and support your people. The last question I guess I've got before I chuck it over to Johnsy is just around you mentioned things about becoming a senior football writer or sports writer, or, you know, kind of going to upper echelons of the industry. What are your goals and you know, your career goals for this space? Are you looking to try and focus more on kind of multi-sports? Are you looking at some point maybe to go back on to football or any other particular sport?
It's a hard question to answer, and I may give you a non-direct answer when it comes to this. I guess I mean, it's transitioning from sort of uni to work in any industry is obviously a challenge, as you guys can probably attest to. And yeah, Sporter have been really great in terms of trusting me to sort of take a lead at times on these sports and different projects, and sort of by nature I've sort of been able to accumulate a lot of knowledge about across different fields. So there's not really a job title target, if that makes sense. I guess I'm just sort of trying to just learn and absorb as much as I can, and then if there's a next step, then obviously take that step. But there's no rush, I guess, from my end. Speaking to sort of being able to sort of talk to some other journalists, both in Sports Pro and out of Sports Pro. It's obviously an industry that if you can sort of get yourself in there with a foot in the door, then you can obviously try and be there for a long time. So longevity would be the goal, and just the scale of opportunity that I've had at Sports Pro has been really good, and just ensuring that those opportunities sort of continue to come around is definitely the priority. So yeah, not really a direct answer in terms of is there a particular target job or anything in mind, but just taking it day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, and sort of just looking to sort of just keep moving forward. It's amazing to be, at least I feel like it's amazing where I've got to in such a short space of time. I'm still very, very green and very young in this industry. So just looking to sort of just keep going up, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It is a good point, man. It does add a lot of context when you talk about some of these life events and saying that you're like at uni, COVID was, it feels like such a short time ago. For you to kind of be where you are right now, is a huge achievement, man. And I think that makes sense. It's very grounded. A lot of people would have probably answered, I want to be this title at this paper or this publication. I want to just do this and just do that. And think they're kind of, close to achieving that now, or kind of, maybe be a bit unrealistic with their goals. But I think, it sounds like you've got your feet on the ground, and I'm sure, along with obviously the great stuff that you write and talk about, I'm sure you'll be able to achieve loads. John, do you have any other questions for Josh before we move to the special segment?
No, I mean, it's great to hear about the fact that you cover so many different sports. I think that's always important as well, because there's a lot of, I guess, football seems like it's its own world at times. It's always good to be able to see how other sports run things, and I'm sure it gives you your own kind of opinions and outlook on how footballers run certain things that they do versus kind of some of the other sports in the US and elsewhere. So just really interesting to see that you cover so many different sports, and I've seen you covered part like the Man United merger as well, and all of that stuff. So I mean, or let's say the Man United owner bids and all of that stuff. So must be interesting to get involved in all the business side of football as well.
Yeah,
I think
sure.
you were being a bit presumptuous. I wish it was a merger or a purchase, but it's just going to end up being what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, you could do a whole podcast on this takeover sale stake process, whatever. I mean, United, when they first sort of said it, they were exploring strategic alternatives was the term. So we've all been sort of in the dark as to what that kind of means and what that is. But yeah, no, to John's point, it's been great to sort of explore sort of things that sort of are happening across a number of sports, like, and again, this could be a whole nother podcast, but Saudi investment, obviously it obviously has been boomed in football, but obviously it's taken shape in so many different sports, and it continues to take shape. So it's nice to have that perspective, and then it's not exactly the most useful thing when it comes to pub quizzes and stuff, but definitely adds some extra context and added info for anyone who's willing to sort of give me 20 minutes or so to sort of entrance them with such stories.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And that's a really good point. We probably don't talk about it enough on this podcast, because I guess there was obviously a bit of a flurry during the transfer window, wasn't there, John, when the Saudi clubs were buying players? But I don't think not too many players from United or Arsenal really got linked with too many moves. So we kind of just talked about it in passing. But yeah, the whole Saudi investment in sports topic is really interesting. And it really gets a lot of people, for some reason, gets, understandable reasons to a certain extent, it gets people's back up, and you get really interesting points of views around it. But it's definitely something that I think we're going to keep seeing in all sports, but especially football, probably in the next 3 to 5 years, and obviously leading up to the World Cup that they recently won the bid of. But yeah, let's move on to the special segment that we ask all guests on the podcast, and that is, who is your favorite Asian player of all time? We kind of talked about it a little bit off camera, but feel free to say someone obvious. You don't have to say someone niche like Jay Harris did, for example, or some of our other guests. You're totally free to say Park Ji-sung or Son Heung-min or someone like that. So yeah, Josh, who is your favorite Asian player of all time?
Oh, it's a big question. It's a really big question when you say it like that. No, I mean, I would be obviously remiss. I think he's obviously a current player, but I think when it's all said and done, Son Heung-min will be top of the tree. Obviously Kim Min-jae as well. I'm big fans of those players, but I wanted to talk about a player who I've always had a fascination with, I guess, and that would be Keisuke Honda, who obviously I mean, I can't pretend that I watched the Russian Premier League in the mid 2010s or early 2010s when he was there, but obviously anytime when Japan was at World Cup, he seemed to be front and center, a sort of big game player. Just that free kick he scored against Denmark in 2010 World Cup from range is just a goal that was sort of one I replayed a lot when, as a fan of watching it. Just he, in an era where I guess the 2010s, we obviously had loads of sort of playmakers, and they seem to sort of have the limelight. It's a shame that he didn't quite have it as much. I know he got a move to AC Milan in 2013, 2014, but it seemed as though just circumstances made it quite difficult, changing coaches and disappointing league finishes. It's a shame that he didn't, and I'm not, by no means do I think, I mean, I imagine, obviously I know Serie A is a quality league, but in terms of his style of play, I'd love to have seen him play in a La Liga or a Bundesliga. I feel like his style of play may have been better suited to those leagues, but yeah, man, I'm a big fan of him. He actually went to Melbourne Victory during the twilight of his career, and that's my local Australian football team, the A-League team, and I was pretty excited to sort of hear that he was coming down to Melbourne. He obviously had a few injuries, so it wasn't quite the impacts that he probably wanted, but he's one of those sort of enigmas of a player, someone who could sort of conjure something out of nothing, and yeah, just a joy to watch. He knew when he got the ball that something was going to happen, and yeah, I'm gonna put him forward as one of the best Asian players of all time. And obviously, I know this dates me because I'm someone who started watching football in 2006. But yeah, in terms of the impact he had sort of during my lifetime, at least, his impact, I feel like, is up there, especially for his country, but also he was a really handy player for club as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great shout. Johns, I can't remember. Has anyone said Honda yet? That might be the first Honda shout we've heard.
He's been given like honourable mentions, but he's never been given the title of favourite Asian player. So yeah, that is a new one.
Nah, that's a great shout, because I have to admit, Honda and Nakata are probably the original Asian ballers, like the stylish ballers that we had so far. And I know what you're saying about Son. I think as an actual football player, like pure impact and just efficiency, Son's probably going to be remembered as the best Asian player. I know Johns won't be too happy about that because of the Spurs stuff, but I think he will. But in terms of just those stylish, like just trend-setting players, I think Nakata was the one when I was young, playing in Italy, where he had the bleached hair, and he just looked stylish in basically every team's kit that he put on. And I think Honda was kind of maybe your generation, Josh, your generation's version of Nakata, because he also had the bleached hair and he also played in kind of a stylish manner. So I think like he was probably a great shout, to be honest. I'm not sure why no one's mentioned him, because I remember when I was at school, or at university in the 2010s, like Honda was a baller. A lot of people rated him, but for some reason he hasn't been shouted out yet.
No, I was going to say, like, he comes from, you mentioned Nakata. There's obviously a long lineage of Japanese playmakers with Shinsuke Nakamura, who was a bit before. Like, I think I was aware of him at the time, but obviously didn't follow Celtic that closely. And obviously after Honda, I mean, you all know Anthony, but Shinji Kagawa, I guess, was probably the next really good Japanese playmaker. Didn't obviously quite hit the heights that we would have liked him to hit, maybe. But yeah, I just remember, I mean, and you mentioned sort of people sort of recognizing Honda. I feel like every World Cup he seemed to turn up with a goal or a headline grabbing performance. He was just someone who was just a bit like sort of when people refer to Ochoa for Mexico, the goalkeeper, like every World Cup he seems to pull in a great performance. I feel like Honda was on a similar level, and just someone who just produced big time performances on a huge stage, obviously the World Cup, and in particular, and he's someone who obviously, as you said, people recognized who weren't from Asia, people recognized and saw as a really good footballer. So happy to obviously he's been mentioned before, but happy to sort of make sure his name is firmly in the conversation.
No, 100%. I think by the time we hit like 100 pods or whatever, like I don't know how many more Asian players are going to be able to be like mentioned for the first time. So I'm glad you got him in here pretty early, and I think he's definitely an Asian footballer who deserves a lot of praise because, like you said, he was definitely Asia's Ochoa or Miroslav Klose or something. Whenever it was a World Cup, you knew Honda was going to turn up. So, great shout out. And I think we'll wrap up the pod here, guys. We're almost at an hour and a half, so it's a bit longer than we originally asked from you, Josh. But thanks a lot for joining. For anyone who wants to keep up to date with Josh's work at Sports Pro, obviously you can check out Sports Pro's channels or any of their content online or physical. I don't know if you guys do any kind of magazines or anything like that, but I know you guys have got a big online presence, bunch of events too. Also, Josh personally, you can follow him on Twitter. We'll put and Threads as well. We'll put his social handles in the description. So yeah, make sure you check him out and obviously support his content. Like I said at the beginning, a young up and coming Asian sports journalist and sports writer that we should all support. He's doing great stuff. So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on, Josh. Really appreciate it. And we'll definitely look to try and get you on again, hopefully in the future. But yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Such a pleasure to be on, guys. Thank you so much for having me on, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Cool. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Before we wrap up, for those of you watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share if you can, drop a comment in down below and let us know if, maybe we're being a bit too pessimistic about United's chances at Liverpool. I don't think we are. Or if, you think, for example, that, United shouldn't have beaten Chelsea, or if you have a different perspective, I can't see how what we've shared on both the reviews and previews can be argued. But if you disagree with any of the points, feel free to drop them in the comments. Myself or Johns will proceed to argue with you in the comments, so go for it. And yeah, if you're listening on any of the audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, or any of the other podcasting platforms, please make sure to follow, give us a 5-star review, or a 1-star, whatever you deem is worthy. And yeah, we'll try and interact with you on those platforms too. But yeah, thanks, Johns, thanks, Josh, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.